Welcome to the Discover Your Mad Skills podcast. I'm your host, Cam Welsh. As an emeritus professor at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, I bring over 2 decades of experience in coaching high-performance case-solving teams. With a track record of guiding 301 very successful teams and mentoring countless students, I'm passionate about helping aspiring young professionals uncover and elevate their unique talents, what I call their mad skills. In each episode, I'll engage in insightful conversations with former team members, fellow coaches, former students, and industry connections. Together, we'll explore specific mad skills from my guests' experiences and valuable advice to empower you on your journey of discovery. Join us and start transforming your potential into remarkable skills that will set you apart. In this episode, my guest is Jeff Peterson, co-founder and CEO of Blue Monarch Management. I've known Jeff for many years, dating back to his time as a student in my early years of my teaching career. Jeff is passionate about helping teams come together and perform at their highest levels. Our conversations often revolve around how the process I use to assist high-performing case-solving teams align with his goals of developing high-performing teams in his business. In this episode, we continue these discussions, aiming to provide young, aspiring professionals with insights on discovering their mad skills for achieving success with their teams. Hello, everybody. In this episode, I have Jeff Peterson. He's the founder and president of Blue Monarch Management, and actually a former student of mine back when I first started teaching. So we've known each other for a number of years. And the idea here is to talk to Jeff about some of his passions. One of those is really around teams. But I'm going to start by letting Jeff introduce himself a little bit and talk a little bit about what motivates him these days.
Hi, Cam. Thanks very much for having me on. So maybe by way of introduction, I'm what we might call these days a builder CEO. So I've evolved a career that had the first half to a third inside of industry. I worked in a multinational railroad at the time. It was Canadian Pacific Railway, and then left for a career transition into external management consulting. As the years have gone forward, I've certainly been deeply integrated in and building a firm out for management consulting, but I'm really starting to awaken the passion around building companies. And our company is just about to unroll a new tagline around building companies and developing communities. So now I'm learning the tools to be able to build, grow, scale, and transform companies, not from a consultant's lens, but from a builder's and a founder's lens. One of the things that has been highly motivating for me throughout my entire career in industry as a consultant, working with various clients in various industries, has really been around talent and people. I love to see good talent put to good work to unlock a lot of value, which is why perhaps the management consulting industry has been really interesting for me, is because I get stretched every day, surrounded by smart, driven, ambitious people that love to problem solve, and that just lights me up.
Yeah, no, and I know over the last little bit, I think since about January, we've talked a fair amount, and I've had you in class, and we've talked a little bit about this whole idea around how do you get that potential out of talent, especially when you start to put that talent into teams, and sort of the whole idea of how in your mind do you get that process underway in terms of sort of getting the talent. I guess the first part of that process is getting the talent to know themselves, sort of building relationships, building some of that trust piece.
Well, Cam, through some of our background conversations with your work in leading award-winning case competitions, you've put yourself into a position where you've had to coach teams forming very quickly with people that are figuring out how to work together under a high-pressure situation. And in the world of management consulting and professional management, it's very much the same kind of environment. Projects form quickly, and you need to make sure that we have a good understanding of how the team comes together and who's on the team and how it needs to work in order to be able to get high productivity very quickly, because that's what clients need and quite frankly demand these days. So in terms of a process, it has to start with a good design. So we need to understand the purpose of the team, the purpose of the project. We need to establish boundaries, and we need to understand the roles on the team that are required. Build clarity quickly, work on the steps to be able to build speed to performance really quickly. And I think this creates a very interesting intersection with the work that you've done on your casework. And then find the balance very quickly after that to build a lasting and evolving structure in what is usually a very dynamic environment. So
yeah, no, I think that sounds really good. I think I just did a newsletter on LinkedIn, and I think I'm on episode 40 now. So I think it's episode 39 that just happened a week ago or so. And there was this really interesting post from Ben Cohen on LinkedIn that just sort of caught my imagination and got me really thinking about it. And he had sort of every second Friday, he brings his team together and what he calls it is a fuck you, thank you type of session. And it just registered in my mind in terms of every practice we go through this debrief situation with a case team. And I know when I first started, I treated it more as a feedback type of loop and sort of used the, I guess, conventional types of feedback loops like the sandwich method, etc. And as you know, probably from being in my class, I'm not very good at giving sandwich type of feedback. I have difficulty giving open face sandwich type of feedback in a lot of cases. And those really transformed into this whole idea of let's talk about what went wrong and what can we learn from that. And the whole idea that through that discussion of what went wrong, some of the things that what went right also appear out of that. And I'm just wondering in terms of if you're leading a team, if you're trying to motivate one of your teams, how do you go about that process in terms of motivating them, getting some feedback? And I think building that ability to talk to one another in a real sort of trustworthy relationship type of mode.
Well, I think you've nailed it, right? So, and it's our, as an organization, and certainly one that's deeply ingrained in the professional services career path, trust is the preeminent value that we have. So, if you allow me a second to backtrack on just 2 points, just to sort of frame my answer on this one, then it may help. In my career history, I've had sort of 4 different scenarios on teaming. 2 are more long-term and more permanent, and the other 2 are more transient, much like your case competition. The 2 longer term are ones where, on one hand, I might be able to be afforded a situation where I get to grow and handpick my team. And so then I can start to build out things like diversity, role clarity, skills, acumen, values, those kinds of things a lot easier. On the other end, I may step into an environment, particularly, for example, more recently, like joining a board of directors and taking on a board chair role or a leadership position on that, where I may inherit a team. And those have a sense of permanency to them. And then it's not getting in for a transient project that disbands the team after it's done. You're working on long-term norms and trust building. And then the other 2 scenarios are obviously the transient ones where, again, I may be able to design and pick a team, right, and sort of handpick the roles and the individuals on it, and then work with the leadership on the team to be able to craft their work. Or I might step onto a team that already exists and have to figure things out. And the way that we build that trust is very different across those 4 different scenarios. And my role increasingly as a senior leader is not always to be immersed in the middle of the team, which then leads to the second framing, which is around collective intelligence. So theoretically, and it's really difficult to see it witnessed in perfection in the management consulting industry. But I got indoctrinated years ago with a very bright prof in my MBA program that was focused on high performance teaming and collective intelligence. And there's a real science to that, but it means that the team's got to hold itself accountable, not necessarily with outside intervention by external leadership and authority. So your comment about feedback and not sandwiching the feedback resonates with me, and it certainly rubs people the wrong way because I don't sandwich either. I think that gets lost in the clarity of the message, and you need to reward people and you need to provide the constructive feedback. But for this to work in teams, the team has to be trusting enough with all of its members to do that to itself without the outside intervention. And that takes time to build.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with it. And I think one of the things, and I don't think I ever told my team members this until I think after I retired. And it more came out in newsletters and some discussions. And actually, I had a lunch with a former student last Wednesday. And we talked about this, and she had been on a couple of my teams, I think with JDC West, and she was on my MBA team a few years ago. And we just got talking a little bit about sort of that team formation thing. And when I sort of mentioned at the beginning, I don't really care what the content they deliver is initially. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I listen to it. I ask some questions that may pertain to the content. But when we get to the feedback thing, it's a lot more in that debrief session. It's a lot more about talking about how did you work together? How are you going to work together? And I think the other thing, and this is not a bad thing, but it is a bad thing when it comes to team environments with I find I work both with undergrads and grad students, mostly MBAs. And I think one of the big things is with MBAs, and again, I've written about this and had some interesting comments back recently, that there's this ego that comes with a person that joins an MBA program.
Mhm.
And I think the first part of it is to destroy that ego, or get them at least to realize the ego stays at the door. And they walk in, their ego stays on the other side of the door until we're done. And I'm wondering, in terms of, you work with people from a wide variety of backgrounds, both clients, both within Blue Monarch. How do you deal with that piece of it, in terms of getting everybody? As I always told Jim DeWalt, the former dean at Haskayne, my goal isn't to have everybody friends, but they need to be able to work together. I think with undergrads, they become friends often. MBAs, it's about developing a working relationship. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, you've got that wide variety that you bring into your company that you've worked with. How do you deal with those types of things as you develop the teams?
Well, with great care and oftentimes great difficulty, we do hire MBAs. I need people that can read companies. In your case competition, it's hardwired into the MBA degree all by itself for people to be competitive and they learn trying to outshine each other. I mean, that's the nature of a case competition all by itself. It's, somewhat hardwired into the MBA. Management consultants, the same thing. So yes, they come from diverse backgrounds. I've got people that are strong in sustainability and transformation, in organizational change, in human resources, and so forth. But some of the common traits that define or underpin a management consultant: high acumen, high intelligence, very ambitious, very disciplined, and consistently what I've seen both internally with us, that dates back to previous firms that I've worked with, as well as even in teams that I managed with the railroad, as well as with clients that we work with, is if you're trying to build a high performance team, one of the challenges that often emerges is you have an ego driven leader or a hero complex that starts to emerge. And in an environment, back to your comment about feedback, in an environment where the hero is rewarded and they are seen to be infallible and can do no wrong, the team providing that leader with that feedback, or that perceived leader, often crumbles the team. So I actually have somebody on my team right now who is exceptional at the quiet leadership. And and we need the ego driven leaders to be able to negotiate and have the strong will to do the tough work in the advisory space. But I have someone on my team who's very, very much a quiet leader. And if you can picture the analogy of a rock in a raging river, she's like the water that flows around it, to get things done, massage the needs of the client, to work, to collaborate with the team, just to bring the team together. Her name is Leanne. She's a colleague of mine back in our MBA days back in 2010. And she just does this so well. She manages to keep the drama low. She brings the people skills together, empowers team members, and makes them own their work and puts them to work. And she's never one of the people that stands up and goes, I need to be seen as the leader. She more shares the credit, and not to single her out away from some of my other really strong team members, but she's really good at what she does.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something that I really look for in terms of teams. Quite often with my teams, I take, especially with international teams, I take a couple of more experienced students with a couple of rookie students. And it wasn't about the competition as per se. Yes, we did well. We won a lot of awards along the way. So that maybe that's part of the process piece of it. But it was really to help those students become stronger in terms of that type of leadership. And I hoped maybe I modeled some of that as I sat across from them. I think there were times where definitely they could read on my face sort of what I was thinking. But I think the whole idea, especially in that competitive team environment, was to really help them sort of come open to what they were thinking and where the problems was. And then hopefully, as sort of the more quiet leader, maybe a little bit noisy at times, to really help guide them in terms of, here's how we start to meet those expectations as we go along, that type of thing. And I just want to, I don't think I've ever told you the story, but I was in Budapest one year with a team, and probably one of the best teams I've ever coached. Talent wise, they worked together fantastically. And the first case we did in Budapest was probably one of the worst cases I've seen my teams do at an international case competition. We knew walking out of the room, there was a pool of 4. We were number 4. And there was no doubt in any of the 5 of our minds as we walked out of the room that we had just finished last. And they hadn't seen the other teams compete. They gained that sense just from the question period and the reaction of the judges. So I credit with them. That evening, we walked to dinner. So we were maybe a 15-minute walk away from, it was a restaurant on the Danube. We were maybe a 15-minute walk if we had walked sort of normally. I think everybody's worried that we had gotten lost or something in Budapest, because I think we showed up 45 minutes late to dinner. And we just had this rich conversation about what happened as you went through, and they just started to talk. And what we discovered partway through the talk was they had decided to change their process a little bit. And their process generally was fairly fixed in terms of they'd read the case, they'd discuss the case, they'd discuss their solution. And in this case competition, you could go away and do some more research. Then they go away, do some more research, come back and start to sort of compile the answer. And in that first session of discussion, they all came upon, this is the solution. I don't know how they convinced themselves this was the solution. And had they done a little bit of research, what they would have discovered is the company has tried this before. I think, and they were right. The company did it in the wrong way. But I think had they had that little bit of information, it would have changed the whole thing. I'm just wondering, in terms of your experience with teams, how does that process work? What happens, and how do you sort of help a team when they sort of go off the rails and they seem to leave the process behind and sort of change stuff, I guess, is sort of my question with that one.
Well, you've alluded to a couple of the techniques already. So one a few minutes ago, with you as a coach outside of the team, as part of the team, but outside of the team, you setting the conditions and the focal points early on in the relationship to not be all about the content and the substance, but actually the process and how do we actually build the relationships and talk with each other. I think it's pretty critical. Your walk in the Budapest example, where you had the team talking with each other and really talking to understand what's going on, right? It's one of those social activities that builds trust very quickly outside of our environments. Those pieces are critical in high learning and high pressure kinds of environments. Our clients don't like us to fail, but the reality of the work that we do in management consulting, project-based, with clients that have wide open white space, our clients don't bring us in for cookie cutter or templated kind of work. We do non-repeatable work that's bespoke and requires a whole lot of net new thinking. It requires an environment set by me that our team members can fail and the team as a whole can fail. And the company's got to be somewhat resilient to that, and our clients need to be resilient to that as well, because it's the learning and the failures that allow us to be able to evolve. And if we've got long-term relationships with clients, we're going to be trying lots of things with them to help them be different, be better, be more competitive, whatever the next part is. And that requires a lot of learning, which means that we've got to break that down and have real conversations with each other. And to your point from a few minutes ago, the feedback is so critical. And if you've got people on the team that are resistant to feedback, again, back to the hero complex or the infallibility, it just crushes the team.
Yeah. No, I would totally agree with that. And I think to finish off the Budapest story, we did run into a little bit of luck. We had a cultural day. So it was a 12 or 14 hour bus ride around just west of Budapest, doing a bunch of activities and that. That was amazing in terms of that team bonded so much during that cultural experience. And they came back for the 24-hour case and just blew it away. They were exactly what I had expected when they did that. So another, I think, type of thing is, and again, this goes back to another team experience I had, and it was a group of MBAs. And we did tons of cases. And this was back with when I was coaching with Larry Wood. And you know Larry probably from your experience as a student, sort of know what he's like. But his goal when we did the MBA ICC at the John Wilson School was we'd do 40 cases. 7 of those cases would be in Montreal at the competition and 33 practices. And we had gone through, and this was a time that we did 40 cases. We made the finals in the year. But it was really interesting in terms of both of us at that time, very experienced coaches, really, really struggled with this team to get them to follow the process. And case number, it would have been case number 33 was done in Montreal. And again, we lucked out a little bit because if you're the second or the first team presenting, you get to watch the second team present. And they walked out of the room convinced they had won the case. I think we had 3 coaches with us that year, and none of the coaches were convinced they had won the case. And later that evening, after I guess it was the World Junior Hockey game, but we gone see they returned the scores and they had lost. And it was really amazing. The next day is this whole new team showed up, and this team that decided to start to follow the process that we thought we had totally failed at ingraining in them over the last 33, or I guess, at that point, 33 cases. I'm just wondering, in terms of some of your experience, just is there a similar type of thing, or how would you sort of deal with that team that just doesn't seem to get it right off the bat, and sort of how do you fix those types of issues, given that, again, you're trying to still stay as that outsider, not being a member of the team, that type of people?
Well, it's a tough one, and there's different solutions depending on the root cause of the issue itself. So a couple of things that you touched on, like around process. We've gone through iterations of our team over the years based on, navigating different crises or different market conditions and fit and all of that. And what we're trying to build with the professional management firm is something that really doesn't exist. More open style, more entrepreneurial, blending management consulting. And it's, lots of people come into it with a preconception of what they should be or how it should operate. And it doesn't always work out that way because we're trying to almost fly the plane as we're building it. So when we talk about a more logical solution to this, we go right back to team design and project design. If we don't spend enough time up front defining what the project is, so the contours, the scope, the shape of the project, and the roles, and quite frankly, now starting to formalize putting on every project, whether big or small, an engagement lead, and on every project, big or small, a PM with standard tools and standard operating procedures for managing projects, a little bit more agile with the work that we do, then it slows the process down because different people that think they understand how to lead or how to do project management come in and attempt to invent the system and the process as they're flying through the early stages of teaming. So if we can set some standard operating conditions and systems up so that people know the place before they walk in and they can walk in and focus, it allows them to think about the trust and the content and actually doing the client work. On the other side of it, you get the heart place, which is more the trust, the breakdown in egos and communication, the missed assignments, hurt feelings, power dynamics, and so forth. And those ones, logical system builds don't follow that. I've had the most success. I never want to embarrass the team, but occasionally I've had to call the whole team in and have people sort of talk things out. It's one of the reasons for wanting to work through an engagement lead on each project is it gives me the ability to have one-on-one conversations or to have one of my people put one-on-one conversations in place so that the leaders, the formalized leader can coach. But usually it's trying to get them to talk and then just have the confidence to talk with each other as opposed to putting some outside intervention in place. That usually drives to a more successful outcome.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. And I think with case competition teams, there's a lot of that heart piece of it. And I think that's the part that it took me a long time to try to figure out how do we deal with that piece of it. And again, I go back to a team that I thought putting them together, fantastic team. It was a 2-person team, and their first presentation, they walked in the room and there was this soft-spoken guy and there was Megan, who was much more aggressive in that. And it was really interesting in terms of how that team developed and became probably, out of all of the teams, so I've coached, I think, 301 teams. I think of all of the teams I've coached over the years, it's the team that I think came to be the most dynamic, the most interchangeable team that I had. They were absolutely fantastic. Although I told my co-coach after the first day practice that he should go down to the resolution room and just make sure there's no bloodline in the room. Because I wasn't sure if they had fought violently with one another. But again, I think those are, as you talk about, there are processes. And I think that's the piece that when I look at post-secondary education, business schools, when we have all of those group projects, often students are just thrown to the wolves. And I think that's a piece that's really missing in terms of especially junior level courses and even most senior level courses. There's not a lot of work that's done around how do you work as a team member. And I'm just sort of thinking in terms of, and I'm looking at the questions again and sort of revamping them as we go along. But if you're up in front of that class, putting up a team project or a team project course together, what are the types of things that you're thinking in terms of these are the skills that I have to help these students in that class come up with by the end?
Really good question. I can talk through a few key skills for the members of a team as well as the natural leadership on the team. But I want to, if you'll indulge me for just a moment, Ken, I just want to address what you made a second ago, because I think it's really critical around the skill building part for members is conflict. Early in my Doctor of Business Administration days at the University of Calgary, I've done my MBA there, I've done my BCom there, I've had teams ad nauseum, board teams, professional teams, client teams, consulting teams. I've been part of it, I've been the leader of them, and I've sat outside and sort of shaped the teams and so forth. So I've kind of seen teams from a lot of different angles, as well as sports teams. One of the universal pieces, though, that I've seen consistently with high performance teams, like really high performance teams in a professional setting, is the inevitable conflict that needs to arise when we move past the being polite stage into actually building real trust. And so for people that are forming teams, I don't shy away from conflict, but it doesn't make most of the people that I work with at ease with that. I don't try and encourage the conflict, but I do try and push people through those moments where they're afraid to dig in, because what comes out the other side is either going to be a complete disbanding of the team, or it's going to bring the team and the group a lot closer together. So the conflict resolution and really trusting people on the team to have the courage to actually voice the things that they need to get to a higher state of performance inevitably happens with every high performing team. There's going to be rough edges. So I can pause there, and then I can sort of get to some of the basic skills. But that more importantly than just about anything else was a critical step in moving from just forming a team working together but not really engaging with each other to getting to a state of high performance while standing in front.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think that's, and I guess over the couple decades of coaching, I think that's been the big struggle too, is how do we get the conflicts that happen? And I think it's really interesting in sort of the student team situation, at least in terms of the competitive thing, is early on, those conflicts don't seem to arise as much. It's once I start to really focus in and drill down on the content piece that it really starts to test their process and their structure, and it starts to involve the conflict piece at that point in time. And again, it's the struggle piece at that point is really sort of how do we get you to get over those conflicts? And I think the conflict, especially in those 3 and 5 hour case resolution pieces, they take so much away, so much gets missed during that conflict piece. So I totally agree with you at that point. So maybe we can get onto some of the skill set pieces now.
Yeah. And it is a transition. It starts off with people when they first join a team looking at themselves going, why am I here? What's my role? How do I engage with people around? And there's a whole lot of that politeness and then the bumping into each other. Once you move through that, though, then it's starting to change the focal point. You nailed it. When you start to focus on the content, it's the why are we here as opposed to why am I here? And now we're focusing, in my world, it's how are we focusing on building companies? How are we focusing on solving a client problem? How do we work together to get out a really tough nugget that I can't do myself, but we as a team can do together? If only we can figure out the secret sauce, right? So breaking down the skills, every member of a team needs to be adaptable, personally adaptable, and the team as a whole needs to build its own identity to adapt. There's got to be proactive and ongoing communication. It's got to be real. You've touched on the feedback piece and just having a real conversation with people. Team has to be naturally curious, and kind of goes back to a book that one of my very first clients years ago had sort of brought into my focus as he was consulting or reverse consulting me and coaching me to not try and be the smartest person in the room. But Edgar Schein from MIT is a researcher who wrote a book called Humble Inquiry. And so it's asking questions you genuinely don't know the answers to as an interesting byproduct of building relationships. And so getting to know your team on a formal and informal basis as your Budapest walk reflected was important. And then the last two pieces that are really critical here are accountability. Members need to be accountable to each other, to themselves, and to the team, as well as to the mission. And a high learning orientation, right? So high performance
Yep.
teams can be dynamic. It's not static. You're learning from each other. You're learning from the environment, stimulus around you. You've got to be able to pivot. And then for those leaders, whether it's formal leaders, and for my industry, because management consultants are inherently all about the control and they like to out consult each other, I usually need to put an external or formalized leader in the team, not to be command and control, but we need to organize, we need to herd the cats and sort of keep things moving forward. And I need a single point of accountability at a senior level to work with clients. So the leaders themselves need to set the environment and they need to frame really well. They need to create the conditions for the team to be successful. And very often they need to shield the team from the external noise, like me, if I'm operating on the outside, to allow the team to perform at a higher level. So those are the things that I would coach a brand new team to set up right from the beginning and then to start developing for themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I think that idea of leadership is big and how you're assigning those leaderships. I think, and again, I don't think I asked this in sort of some of the preliminary list of questions we came up with. But one of the things is when I interview students, one of the questions that quite often comes up, and this is a lot with JDC West, and these actually come from the captains. And one of the questions that have been there over the years is, what position do you take on a team? And I would say out of the probably 500 JDC West interviews I've witnessed over the years, 99% of those, the student says leader. And I sort of sit back and I think if I asked, and I've never done this, I wish I had done this. I wish I had asked them the question after the competition. I've done this with some of my international competitors, and the answer is quite a bit different in terms of it's not leader, it's taking on the role that I need to at the time. And I'm just looking for, if you step back, 20, 25 years ago when you were in the classroom, what advice would today's Jeff give younger Jeff in terms of that? Because again, I think these are some of the most important skills that you bring into your career.
Specifically addressing the point around what role do you take on a given team? Yeah, I think the point is brilliant. And, as a guy who's been working over the last number of years to set up a very adaptive and energy management consulting firm, which is continuing to evolve. Very often when people bring in new clients and new business, they make the assumption that they're automatically going to lead the project, or it's going to be a project even that they're going to be part of. Clients have a funny way of not wanting to pay for less than stellar work. And if you put someone on a project team that doesn't have the skills to be able to do a particular role, then you're going to get subpar quality. When you get into the leadership, though, that accelerates things even a little bit more, right? Because we put our engagement leads and our senior leaders driving the project into a position where they need to manage the dynamics of the team, emotional dynamics, system dynamics, performance dynamics, and there's a high standard in management consulting to deliver high quality work reliably. And then you put them in a position where they now need to present the team, protect the team, and shape the team with the clients. And we have to put a strong presentation forward with the clients and a really good working relationships. If you have someone who's automatically stepped into that leadership position because they assume just because I've got the relationship, therefore I'm equipped to lead it, we're dead. So if I go back and look at my earlier days when I was first starting off in my career, as an individual contributor, it would be curious, get to know the people on my team, and understand how my role influences the team performance, and not be so worried about who's standing up and taking the credit and leading. I think I was pretty good about that in my earlier days, but it then leads, though, into, again, 11 years working with a multinational railroad. There were about 16,000 employees at the time. Teams are highly networked and integrated in large enterprise. And so where I made a ton of mistakes in my first years of managing teams, junior manager, learning how to build teams and get them to perform, I spent more time shaping, building, protecting what would have been viewed as micromanaging team, as opposed to trying to work with other teams in the organization to open doors and build relationships and allow my team to grow at their pace as opposed to at the pace that I wanted them to work. So for anybody that's going through an MBA program or that aspires to be a manager in an organization of some kind, and I would say a natural leadership role is actually to create the opportunities and the environment for the team to thrive, not to drive a team towards any particular set of behaviors internally.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And I think that's been a little bit of my philosophy in terms of how do we take these very raw students at the beginning of a case team process and transform them into something that has a skill set that's going to be able to be accountable, be adaptable, and I think be leaders from different aspects or different perspectives within the team perspective. I guess sort of the last question here is just sort of your opportunity, because as you know, I'm developing this to really kind of key to young and aspiring professionals. And so what advice does Jeff have?
I've touched on it a couple in terms of if I had a career do-over, it's the paying attention to the dynamics within a team that you're working and thinking carefully about relationships. But maybe let me extend the relationship piece. I got some very good advice in one of my very first HR profs in my very first BCom program that career professionals would be transitioning careers, and this was back in the early 2000s, but no less than 5 complete career transitions in their lifetime. And I grew up with parents who were in the education system that had tenure roles and very clear roadmaps for how their careers would evolve. To step into a world where power, influence, ability to get things done is built based on relationships and networks. You certainly need the skills to be able to do that. With modern tools and technologies and things like that, I still view it as critically important that you have a strong internal and external network in whichever organization. So building relationships with people, finding ways to be able to make friends on other teams successful with the work that they do, as opposed to trying to take the credit. Those are lessons that are critically important early on as the complexity of companies ratchets up substantially, and then the level of integration for how people get work done. It's no longer an individual sport. Business and consulting are team sports. So the single unifying lesson is be curious and build relationships with people for the purposes of helping to advance some really interesting and complex work. That'd be where my coaching would go.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. And I really like the fact that you take this to a sport. I think that's something that I've always treated sort of the case team piece as. It's when I talk to my American colleagues in particular, I talk to it as we treat this like a sport. And I think, again, going back to Larry Wood, and I think he had a fairly large influence when I started coaching with him. I think, and it was mutual. We had impact on each other. But I think one of the things that he always talked about was when we practice like we want to play, like and those pieces of it. So I think again, and when I look at those students that I brought onto teams, one of the things that really convinces me that they should be a team member is experience on an athletic team in the past, be it an individual sport, a team sport, because even individual sports have that team aspect to it. And I think that becomes a really important piece of it as we go along and bring that. I think probably to wrap up then, um, yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Which is, apologies for extending the time here a little bit, but it's
no
one of the
problem.
topics that I find most interesting about the work that you do. It's the evolution of progressive management towards coaching, right? And how do we move from the top down leader that does the command and control style accountability, what have you done, where's the performance metrics, to one where you very much take on a coaching role and you're a team to grow and thrive and develop and to own their work and own their mistakes and own their successes, but being available to them to shape and guide and mentor, as opposed to driving hard numbers and hard directive at them. This is particularly intriguing in my field, how we adapt our organizations to embrace more of the techniques that you are using to be able to inspire teams to be the best versions of themselves. So I think you're onto something substantial here around the value of a coaching mindset to unlock the potential in a team. So I just wanted to highlight.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And I think that really summarizes a lot of discussions I've had with other coaches or coaching faculty members. I think we always find ourselves when we start to talk at case competitions, we have completely different conversations than we do at academic conferences, etc. And we start to think about what is the future of business education. And I think a lot of it is we need to move away from sort of this prescribed lecture piece. That it's valuable for parts. There's knowledge that has to be built, and there's some skills that, or some basic skills that need to be built as part of the education system. But I think a lot of it is we see the senior years of a business education, probably a lot of education, more in terms of taking on that coaching role and really allowing students to thrive, students to grow in terms of those skill development pieces that they're going to find important in the business world. And when we really, I think about this, and I think about this, it's not just business education. I think it's everybody that's coming out and trying to get into a career progression of some sort. I think I always start out, when I teach my first year class, I always start out with a statement like, who's here to stay in the same job for the rest of their career? Guess what? No hands go up. And I think a lot of it is about discussing that you're here to become managers, become senior managers, become business owners, all of those types of things. And so how do we help you get and develop and get the personal growth, the personal development? And I think in a lot of cases, the classes, and I think you were early in my career, so probably not as much as this, but a lot of my focus on the classes it wasn't about really learning everything. Yeah, there's some important stuff to learn, and there's some concepts, and there's some things you need to be able to do when you exit a course. But a lot of it is about this whole idea that these are personal growth courses rather than business courses in a lot, especially when we get to the senior level. And I think the classes that you came in to speak to as a guest speaker, again, I think that was a key component of those pieces in terms of here's a way that you can start to grow. And I think in the latter years, a lot of that was about business transformation. But just, again, more of how do we start thinking about this stuff rather than here's a whole bunch of facts and stuff that you have to memorize and regurgitate type of thing. And sort of how do we develop that into a personal growth piece? Yeah. No, thank you very much. And as I said, I hope we can do this again at some point and dive a little bit deeper into some of the things we talked about.
Thanks very much for having me, Cam. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you for joining us on Discover Your Mad Skills Toolkit Unbarred Conversations. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like the show, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you feel inclined, we'd appreciate it if you could leave us a like or a 5-star review. Until the next episode. Join us in transforming the lives of young aspiring professionals by supporting our podcast, the Discover Your Mad Skills Toolkit YouTube channel, and our LinkedIn newsletter at buymeacoffee.com/treadsoftly or by scanning the QR code below. Your contributions directly fuel our mission to equip these individuals with the vital mad skills that today's employers demand. Together, we can make a significant impact on their career to success.